Hmm. We've just um, had a visit from Badger at Rat's house. Everybody's very serious because Toad Hall has been taken over by the weasels, Stoats, and Ermine, or the ferrets, Stoats, and weasels, however you want to call them. Um, and I have a question for you. How do Rat and Badger react to Toad's return? Do they let bygones be bygones? Yeah. Has Toad stopped being irresponsible and conceited? I would say not exactly. I mean, he did go out 2 times, got shot at once, and sank a boat. But he's beginning to think about changing. Please let people think about changing and change in small ways. Okay. Who has taken over Toad Hall? Hmm. Um, Let me remind you that badgers, real badgers, build complicated tunnel networks. Just like we saw this personified badger have a complicated tunnel home, actual badgers have complicated tunnel homes. And the same with a mole burrow can be a tunnel network as well. There are other animals that build burrows or tunnels. Can you think of any? Rabbits and foxes? That's right. Rabbits and foxes build tunnels. Now, ferrets, stoats, and weasels do not build their own burrows, but they live in burrows made by other creatures. Hmm. So, is building an underground tunnel a real trait or an example of personification for badgers and moles? It's a real trait of an actual animal. And just like building a tunnel is a real trait, stealing another creature's tunnel is a real trait or an example of personification for these weasels, stoats, and ferrets. It's a real trait. Okay, so we're going to see the personified weasels, stoats, and ferrets steal a house. They stole Toad Hall, but they would normally steal a home or move into somebody's empty home rather than build one on their own, which was interesting. I didn't know that. So let's go ahead and begin our read aloud. This is the last chapter. Toad was quite alarmed at Badger's serious style of greeting, but the rat whispered to him, "Never mind. He's always despondent when he's hungry." They waited in silence, and presently there came another knock. The rat, with a nod to Toad, went to the door and ushered in the mole. "Hooray! Here's the old Toad!" cried Mole. "Why, you must have managed to escape, you clever Toad." The rat, alarmed, pulled him by the elbow, but it was too late. Toad was puffing and swelling already. "Clever? Oh, no," Toad said. "I'm not really clever. According to my friends, I've only broken out of the strongest prison in England, that's all, and captured a railway train and escaped on it, that's all." "Well, well," said the mole, moving toward the supper table. "Supposing you talk while I eat. Not a bite since breakfast." And he sat down and helped himself to cold beef and pickles. Toad straddled the hearth rug, thrust his paw into his trouser pocket, and pulled out a handful of silver. "Look at that," he cried, displaying it. "That's not so bad, is it, for a few minutes' work? And how do you think I done it, Mole? Horse stealing, that's how I done it." "Go on, Toad," said the mole, immensely interested. "Toad, do be quiet, please," said the rat. "And don't you egg him on, Mole. Just tell us what the position is and what's to be done now that Toad is back." "The position's about as bad as it could be," replied the mole. "Armed sentinels posted everywhere at Toad Hall." "It's a very difficult situation," said the rat, reflecting deeply. "But I think I see what Toad really ought to do." "No, he oughtn't," shouted the mole. "Well, I shan't do it anyway," cried Toad, getting excited. "I'm not going to be ordered about by you fellows." And by this time they were all three talking at once, at the top of their voices, when a thin, dry voice made itself heard, saying, "Be quiet," and instantly everyone was silent. It was the badger. "Toad," he said crossly, "aren't you ashamed of yourself? What do you think your father would have said if he had been here tonight?" Toad, who was on the sofa by this time, began to sob. "There, there," went on the badger more kindly. "Stop crying. We're going to let bygones be bygones. But what the mole says is true. There are guards at every point. There's no point in trying to take the place by storm." Ooh, did you see that badger said let bygones be bygones? They're going to forgive Toad and let go of what has happened in the past. "Then it's all over," sobbed the toad, crying into the sofa cushions. "I shall have to join the army." "Come, cheer up, Toady," said the badger. "There are more ways of getting back a place than taking it by force. Now I'm going to tell you a secret." Toad sat up and dried his eyes. Secrets had an immense attraction for him because he never could keep one. "There is an underground passage," said the badger, "that leads from the river bank right up into the middle of Toad Hall." "Oh, nonsense, Badger," said Toad. "I know every inch of Toad Hall." "My young friend," said the badger with great severity, "your father told me a great deal he wouldn't have dreamt of telling you. He made me promise not to tell you about it unless you really needed to know." The other animals looked hard at Toad to see if he would take it. Toad was inclined to be sulky at first, but soon he brightened up. Why do you think Toad's father would tell something to Badger and not to his own son? Toad. Is Toad responsible or irresponsible? If somebody that irresponsible, you're not going to tell him secrets. Well, he said. "Go on, Badger. How's this passage of yours going to help us?" "I've found out," continued the badger, "there's going to be a banquet tomorrow night. It's somebody's birthday, and all the weasels will be gathered together in the dining hall. No weapons of any sort." "But the sentinels will be posted as usual," remarked the rat. "Exactly," said the badger. "That's my point. The weasels will trust entirely to their guards, and that's where the passage comes in. That tunnel leads right up under the butler's pantry next to the dining hall." A butler's pantry is like a special room that holds serving dishes. "We shall creep out quietly into the butler's pantry," cried the mole. "With our pistols and swords and sticks," shouted the rat. "And rush in upon them," said the badger. "And whack 'em and whack 'em and whack 'em," cried Toad in ecstasy. "Very well, then," said the badger, resuming his usual dry manner. "Our plan is settled. We'll make all the necessary arrangements in the morning." Toad slept till a late hour next morning, and by the time he got down he found that the other animals had already breakfasted. The mole had slipped off somewhere, the badger was sitting reading the paper, and the rat was organizing an enormous pile of weapons. "I think the job can be done without the need for weapons, Rat," said the badger presently. "It's as well to be on the safe side," said the rat reflectively. The toad, having finished his breakfast, picked up a stick and swung it vigorously around him. "I'll learn him to steal my house," he cried. "Don't say learn him, Toad," said the rat. "It's not good English." "Well, what are you always nagging at Toad for?" inquired the badger. "What's the matter with his English? It's the same what I use myself, and if it's good enough for me, it ought to be good enough for you." "I'm very sorry," said the rat humbly. "I only thought it ought to be teach them and not learn them." "But we don't want to teach them," replied the badger. "We want to learn them, and what's more, we're going to do it, too." "Oh, very well, have it your own way," said the rat. Presently the mole returned, and the four companions continued to make plans to recapture Toad Hall. When it began to grow dark, the rat summoned them back into the parlor to prepare for the coming expedition. When all was ready, The badger took a dark lantern in one paw, grasped a stick with the other, and said, "Now then, follow me. Mole first, because I'm very pleased with him. Rat next, Toad last." The toad was so anxious not to be left behind that he did not protest. With Badger leading the way, they soon found themselves in the secret passage. It was cold and dark, and Toad began to shiver. The lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind. Then, fearful of being left alone in the dark, Toad hurried forward and bumped into Rat. The badger thought they were being attacked and drew a pistol. He was on the point of putting a bullet into Toad when he discovered what had really happened. He was very angry and said, "Now this time that tiresome Toad shall be left behind." But Toad whimpered. And the other two promised to look out for him. And at last the procession moved on. They shuffled along till at last the badger said, "We ought by now to be nearly under the hall." And then suddenly they heard a confusing murmur of sound, as if people were cheering. The passage now began to slope upward, and then the noise broke out again very close above them. "Hooray, hooray, hooray!" they cried, and the stomping of little feet. "What a time they're having," said the badger. "Come on." They hurried along the passage till it came to an end, and there they found themselves standing up under the trap door that led into the butler's pantry. Such a tremendous noise was going on in the banqueting hall that there was little danger of their being overheard. And Badger said, "Now, all together," and the four of them put their shoulders to the trap door and heaved it back. Hoisting each other up, they found themselves standing in the pantry. The noise they heard as they emerged from the passage was deafening. At last, as the cheering and hammering subsided, a noise could be heard as well. "Well, I should like to say one word about our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad." Great laughter. "Modest Toad." Shrieks of merriment. "Just let me get at them," murmured Toad. "Hold hard a minute," said the badger, restraining him with difficulty. "Get ready, all of you." And the badger drew himself up, took a firm hold of his stick, glanced around at his comrades, and cried, "The hour is come, follow me," and flung the door wide open. My, what a squealing and a screeching filled the air. Well might the terrified weasels dive under the table. Well might the ferrets rush wildly for the fireplace and the chimney therein. And well might the tables and chairs be upset when the four heroes strode into the room. They were but four in all, but to the panic-stricken weasels and before long the stoats, Toad Hall seemed full of monstrous animals, and they broke and fled with squeals of terror. And so Toad Hall was reclaimed. "Mole, you're the best of fellows," declared Badger to Mole, so impressed was he with how valiantly Mole had fought. Toad felt rather hurt that the badger hadn't complimented him on how splendidly he had fought. But Toad put aside his jealousy and thanked Mole for his help. That seems like a difference, doesn't it? "Toad," said Badger, "you must have a banquet to celebrate." Thinking immediately of all the speeches he would make and songs he would sing about his own leading part in the fight, Toad puffed up with conceit once more. He became so inflated that his friends suspected right away what Toad was up to. "Now, Toad," said the rat, "we want you to understand there are going to be no speeches and no songs, especially as your songs are all self-praise and gas," said the badger. "It's for your own good, Toady," went on Rat. "You know you must turn over a new leaf sooner or later." Toad thought a long while. "My friends, you shall never have occasion to blush for me again," he said. "But oh dear, this is a hard world," and so he was indeed a changed Toad. As the weeks and months passed by, many tales were told of the great siege at Toad Hall. Toad became a more thoughtful Toad, and life on the riverbank continued, as did the friendships of the creatures with whom you've just become acquainted. Why didn't Toad's father tell him about the underground passageway? Do you think that was a wise decision? Why or why not? And why do Badger and the others want to use an underground passage? Well, they need to secretly get into the house, and sentinels are posted around the house. They can't sneak up. Where does the underground passageway lead? How are Rat, Toad, Mole, and Badger planning to use the underground passageway? They're going to sneak into the house and surprise the weasels, ferrets, and stoats. Toad is in ecstasy about the possibility of whacking them. Describe the tunnel passage with the animals use. How would you use your senses to perceive this hidden passage? What does it look like, feel like, sound like, and smell like? Describe how the four animals are able to come in through the butler's pantry without being heard. Why could nobody hear them? Because the weasels, ferrets, and stoats were making a deafening amount of noise. Why do you think Rat tells Toad that he should turn over a new leaf or start over again in his life? Well, just Toad's irresponsibility is still going to get him in trouble if he's not careful. His actions have affected his friends. Yeah, be very careful. That's the end of our read aloud, boys and girls, but that's not the end of all the stories in The Wind in the Willows. There are many additional stories, some with the same characters and some with different characters. But if you love these stories, you could think about checking out a book at the library or finding it in the school library eventually.